man seen smashing windows of an AutoZone in Minneapolis in the early days of the George Floyd protests has actually been identified. And this was based on a tip given to authorities via email. And there has now been an affidavit identifying this individual as 32-year-old Mitchell Carlson. And he does have a documented history of violence. He also has ties to white supremacist groups and certainly is not part of any Black Lives Matter protest. He is in fact an agitator who caused some serious damage to that AutoZone. And that had a domino effect that led to more violence, more damage during that protest. Now, according to the Daily Beast, in a search warrant affidavit, police say they have received a tip that the man is Mitchell Carlson, a full-fledged member of the Hells Angels and a known associate of the Aryan Cowboys. The Aryan Cowboys are a known prison gang out of Minnesota and Kentucky. Although the search warrant does not charge Mitchell with a crime, it stated that investigators were seeking data from cell phone towers that would provide information as to his whereabouts during the incident. The affidavit also noted that within a short time after the looting started, the AutoZone was set on fire. This was the first fire that set off a string of fires and looting throughout the precinct and the rest of the city. And for those of you who maybe didn't catch this story when we reported on it, or maybe forgot what this story was about, I do want to just quickly toss to the video showing the destruction that this man was causing, again, in the early days of the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis.
That's why I'm doing this shit, guys. What the? I ain't got part of that. Dude.
So John, even when I first talked about this story on the show, I pointed out that there were Black Lives Matter protesters who were trying to stop him, and he refused to stop. He also spray painted some ridiculous stuff onto the building, including free stuff for everyone zone, trying to basically characterize, trying to characterize these protesters as individuals who are looking for free stuff. But I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, or at least as people who advertise free stuff for other people. It seems more giving than usually the stereotype is. So I have a point to make, but I do have a question beforehand, because it seemed to me initially when I read these stories that this was the person, but the police seem to be acting as if it's a tip but not confirmed. Are they accepting that this is the actual individual present in the video you showed?
It seems like they want more evidence, which is why the search warrant affidavit makes it clear that they want cell phone tower information to confirm his whereabouts. Yeah. He's identified as the top suspect in this case, and when you look at his history, you can see why. So, for instance, he's been implicated in other incidents involving violence. He was allegedly present when the Aryan Cowboys were accused of harassing a Muslim woman in late June. In February, he was charged with making terroristic threats and domestic abuse by strangulation. In February, he was sentenced on a misdemeanor level for the threats, but the abuse charges were later dismissed. In a separate case last month, he was convicted of domestic abuse. And yeah, go ahead.
And that's why, I mean, look, I'm sure we've talked about it a million times. I know we don't, we're not necessarily gonna go on ad nauseum about it, but our country doesn't take domestic abuse nearly seriously enough. And when we don't take it seriously, it leads to these people committing other crimes. Like so often, this is one of the things you find with people who go on to not necessarily generally do things like this, but eventually end up killing people, is that they had domestic abuse cases in their past as well. And we generally just ignore it. We don't treat it as the serious crime that it is. But in terms of this, the thing that's depressing about this coming out is like, we knew as soon as we saw that video that that's not like Joe DSA who's like, you know what, I'm gonna use an umbrella. And I support the movement, that's why I'm doing this. Nobody actually thought that. But it's that it gets confirmed, and it's just the latest of a number of videos where the worst sort of crimes, the worst violence in all of these protests has always ended up being traced back to white supremacists, militias, the Boogaloo Boys, all of that stuff. And no matter how much it is, no matter how many confirmations there are, no matter how many murders there are, people running into crowds with their cars, like the people who are talking about how unacceptable the violence is at these riots, like Fox News and Trump and Barr and all of that, they'll never even acknowledge that any of these cases exist. It doesn't matter. Like, even if the investigation is done, this person is found and they're charged, that's a tiny bit of justice for the actual event, but not for the situation that we have. The attempt to demonize the protesters and ignore their justifiable desires will continue, in part because all of the people who have actually been committing violent acts, including murder, they just get ignored.
I mean, I can't get over the way some police spoke about Garrett Foster, who was shot and killed by an individual who was planning on driving into a crowd of protesters. This happened in Austin, Texas. We shared the details of that story earlier this week. And it's amazing how this guy was shot and killed. This protester was shot and killed. And based on what witnesses are saying, he was shot and killed as he jumped in front of his fiance, who was in a wheelchair. And he did it to protect her as this individual was trying to drive into the crowd. But he's the bad guy. The victim who was shot to death and can't defend himself, can't speak for himself today. And you're right, those are the kinds of stories that you don't hear about on Fox. But they do love to latch on to imagery of violence, the so-called looting, the property damage, the graffiti, in order to just completely mislead people about what this movement is about. And it's really hard to argue that police brutality isn't a problem in this country when we see nonstop images of police brutality and the violence that they engage in when dealing with these protesters. They prove the protesters right every single day.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.